When your own mother squeezes your hand under the Thanksgiving table as she's apologizing for something she can't say out loud, you learn to read silence differently than most people do. I was 26 that November. My aunt had made the pie from scratch. The house smelled like butter and cinnamon and old arguments nobody ever finished. And my uncle, my dad's older brother, the one who'd made a point of mentioning his lake house at least twice every holiday, leaned back in his chair and looked at me the way people look at something they've already written off. "So," he said, swirling his wine. Still doing the photography thing, he didn't say thing like it was neutral. He said it like he was describing a rash. My cousin laughed first. He was 29, wore a fleece vest from a company that had laid him off 8 months ago but hadn't told the family yet, and laughed at everything my uncle said because that was how survival worked in this family. "She's got a website," my cousin said. "Very artsy." "A website?" My uncle nodded slowly. "Like this confirmed something." "That's not exactly a 401k, sweetheart." My dad didn't say anything. He never did. He just looked at his plate and moved the stuffing around with his fork, which was his version of a white flag. My mum's hand found mine again under the tablecloth. I smiled. The kind that starts at your mouth and doesn't go anywhere near your eyes. "I'm doing fine, actually." "Fine?" my uncle repeated. "Fine is what people say when they don't want to say struggling." The table laughed. Even my aunt, who knew better, laughed a little. I set down my fork. I picked up my wine. I looked at the chandelier my grandmother had bought at an estate sale in 1987, still hanging there like nothing had changed, and I thought about the email sitting in my inbox. The one from a woman named Teresa Vance at the Wall Street Journal, sent 40 minutes before I drove here. I'd read it 3 times in the driveway. Then I put my phone in my purse and walked inside to be the family disappointment one more time. The email could wait. It had waited this long. I'd started Lumen Studio 4 years earlier in a 1-bedroom apartment in Austin with a second-hand camera, a laptop I'd bought refurbished, and exactly one client, a restaurant that paid me $800 to photograph their menu. My uncle knew about the restaurant. He'd used it as a punchline at Easter. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Lumen Studio had spent the last 2 years operating under a different name and licensing. A name I'd created specifically so the work could speak before anyone knew it was mine. High-end editorial. Architecture, campaign work for brands that didn't advertise the fact that they used boutique studios because their audience expected the illusion of in-house production. I wasn't struggling. I hadn't been struggling for a long time. But I'd learned somewhere around year 2 that telling your family good news before it was undeniable was like handing them a scalpel. They'd use it to find the seam. So I waited. I'd been waiting for something big enough that there'd be no room left for a well. But no space for that's nice, but your cousin just got promoted. I needed something that would fill the whole room. The Wall Street Journal was something big enough. My uncle had started talking about interest rates. He did this at every gathering, pivoted to macroeconomics as a way of reminding everyone that he'd worked in banking for 22 years before early retirement. My cousin was nodding. My dad was still working on the stuffing. My mum had let go of my hand to pass the cranberry sauce. I excused myself to use the bathroom. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the tub and opened the email again. Teresa Vance, Senior Features Editor, WSJ Magazine. We've been following your work under the Meridian licensing banner for some time. We'd like to feature Lumen Studio and you in our spring issue. The angle is the rise of independent creative agencies that have quietly reshaped editorial visual culture over the last decade. You're at the top of that list. Please call me when you're available. I stared at it until my eyes blurred a little. Then I heard my uncle's voice through the door, carrying down the hallway. She's always been like this, even as a kid, always with the creative dreams you just hope eventually they grow out of it. And I put my phone away and went back to the table. I didn't call Teresa that night. I waited until Monday. And in the time between, I smiled at my uncle. I helped clear the dishes. I listened to my cousin talk about his fantasy football league, and I held all of it in my chest like kindling waiting for a spark. The weeks after that call were quieter than I expected. Not because nothing was happening, everything was happening, but because I'd learned how to be still while the world moved around me. Teresa and I talked for 2 hours that first call. She'd been tracking the Meridian work for 8 months, had reached out to 4 other editors who'd licensed through the banner and gotten the same answer. Whoever is behind this understands composition the way most people only understand it, after 20 years. She wanted the story of how I'd built it. She wanted to shoot me in my studio for the cover. The cover! I told her I'd think about it. I needed a day. I called my best friend, the one who'd let me sleep on her couch the first winter I was in Austin, the one who'd proofread my first client proposals and told me when they were bad, and she screamed for approximately 45 seconds before I could get a word in. Then she said quietly, "Have you told your family yet?" "Not yet," I said. "When?" I looked out the window of my studio at the parking lot below. "When it's real," I said. "When they can see it." She understood. She'd met my uncle. The magazine had a lead time of 3 months. The issue would hit stands in late March. Teresa's team wanted final approvals by January, which meant the profile would be written and locked before anyone in my family would see it. My uncle called me in December, 2 weeks before Christmas. He was coming to town and wanted to take the family to dinner at a steakhouse he liked because he had a membership card. He didn't invite me, and my dad mentioned it afterward. He just didn't think you'd be interested, you know how he is. And I said I know and hung up and went back to reviewing proofs with Teresa's photo team. I was interested. I was just used to not being included. My dad called again on Christmas Eve. My parents had a small thing at their house, just immediate family, and he wanted to know if I was coming. I said yes. The house was warm in a way that felt different at Christmas than it did at Thanksgiving. Quieter, something less performative about it. My mum had put white lights on everything. My dad had made his chili. My younger brother was home from his second year of grad school, and he hugged me at the door and said, "You look tired," and I laughed because it was the most accurate thing anyone in my family had said to me in years. We ate. We watched a movie my mum had seen 3 times before, and then, later, after my brother fell asleep on the couch and my dad was washing dishes and my mum was sitting across from me at the kitchen table with her tea, she looked at me the way she sometimes did when she was measuring something. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Really, I'm good, Mum." And I meant it. For once, I meant it completely. She studied me a moment. "Something's different." "I'm tired," I said. She nodded slowly, like she didn't fully believe me but wasn't going to push. Then she reached across and patted my hand. "Whatever you're working on," she said, "I hope it's worth it." I thought about the cover mock-up Teresa had emailed me the week before. My name, the studio name, the lighting in the photo they'd chosen, which I'd taken myself in my own space. I thought about the pull quote they pulled from our interview. "The most dangerous thing in any industry is the person no one's keeping an eye on." It is, I told my mum. The magazine came out on a Thursday in late March. I knew the date for 3 months. I'd known it the way you know a thing is coming, but still can't fully make your body believe it. It lives in your chest as this abstract weight, half dread, half something you don't have a clean word for. I was in my studio at 6 in the morning when Teresa texted, "It's up online. Print hits newsstands today. Congrats, truly." I opened the digital edition on my laptop. There it was, 10 pages. The headline read, "The Invisible Architecture of Modern Visual Culture," and the Texas woman who built it. My phone started buzzing before I finished reading the first paragraph. Industry contacts I hadn't spoken to in a year. A former professor from the community college where I'd taken my first real photography class, who found the article through an alumni newsletter. 3 separate emails from agencies who wanted to discuss representation. A text from a client I'd worked with twice, who said I had no idea it was you this whole time. The Meridian work, "It was you," and I typed back yes, and then sat there with my phone in my hands for a moment, and then my phone rang. Not a text, a call. It was my uncle. I let it go to voicemail. He called back 4 minutes later. I let it go again. He texted, "Saw the WSJ piece. We should catch up." I read it. I put my phone face down on my desk. I went back to the emails. My dad called at noon. His voice was different from my uncle's. Not transactional, Not pivoting, just quiet and a little lost, the way he got when something had happened that he didn't have language for yet. "I saw the magazine," he said. "I know." A pause. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at my studio. The walls, the equipment I'd bought one piece at a time, the prints I'd taken down and put back up a dozen times, trying to figure out what I was making. "I wanted it to be real first," I said, "before I told anyone." Another pause, longer. "It's very real, sweetheart." Something in my chest went loose in a way that I hadn't planned for. "Yeah," I said. "It is. Are you? I mean, is this the whole thing, the Meridian name, all that work, you did that alone?" "With a small team," I said, "but yes, mostly." He made a sound I didn't know how to categorize. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't. I'm sorry for that." It wasn't the apology I'd have written for him. It was too small, too short. But it was real. I could tell the difference by then between real and performed. My dad had never been good at performance. "It's okay," I said. "No," he said quietly. "It's not, really." And he left it there, which was more than most people would have done. My uncle's second text came in that afternoon. "Really impressive work, Vivian. Would love to connect. I actually have some clients who could use a photographer at this level." I read it twice. The way he'd written at this level, like this level, was somewhere he was graciously allowing me access to. Like the 11 years I'd spent building something real had been a coincidence that had finally aligned with his awareness. I didn't respond. 3 days later, my uncle showed up at a lunch my dad had organized. My parents, my brother, my uncle and me. A small Italian place my dad liked. My uncle had suggested it, which meant he'd organized it, and told my dad he'd organized it as a favor. He came in talking. He was good at that, at filling a room before he'd even sat down, so that by the time the menus arrived, the tone was already his. He talked about an investment conference he'd just attended. He talked about a contact of his at a design firm in Chicago. He talked about the article, how he'd read it twice, how he'd forwarded it to people, how he'd always thought I had real talent. It was just a matter of finding the right... "The right what?" my brother asked. My uncle looked at him. "Opportunity," he said after a beat. "She built the opportunity," my brother said, not aggressively, just flatly. Like it was obvious. There was a small quiet. My uncle smiled. "Of course she did. I'm not saying otherwise." He turned to me. "I just want you to know the door is always open if you want to expand into the corporate space. I have contacts, people who could really use..." "I appreciate that," I said. "I'll keep it in mind." I used the same tone I used with vendors who'd missed a deadline. Polite. Closed. My uncle nodded. He moved on. He talked about the conference again. I ate my pasta and let the conversation wash around me, and thought about the fact that 3 days ago this man had not included me in his concept of people worth having dinner with, and today he was offering me doors. I thought about what a door was worth when it came from someone who'd spent a decade believing you didn't belong in the building. Afterward, my mum walked me to my car. The parking lot was cold, still March, and she had her coat pulled tight around her. "You didn't say much," she said. I said enough. She was quiet a moment, looking at the asphalt. "Then he called your grandmother when the article came out. She called me to tell me she was proud of you." I stopped. "Grandma saw it. She gets the paper delivered. Physical copy." My mum smiled. "She called to say she always knew." I looked up at the sky, the grey kind you get in Texas in late winter, flat and close. "Did she? She said you always had that look, like you were building something nobody could see yet." My mum looked at me. I think she was right. I didn't cry in front of her. I waited until I was in my car with the doors closed and the heat running, and then I sat there for a minute with my eyes closed and breathed. The magazine did what Teresa had said it would do. By April, Lumen Studio had more requests than I could service in 6 months. I brought on 2 new photographers, people I'd worked with before, people I trusted. I expanded the licensing model. An agency in New York that had been circling for 2 years finally committed to a formal partnership. My uncle reached out twice more. Once to ask if I'd consider shooting an event for a colleague of his. Corporate, he said, but the exposure would be great. And once to forward me a LinkedIn article about creative entrepreneurship with the note, "Thought of you." I didn't respond to either. My cousin texted me separately, not to ask for anything, just saw the article. "Sorry I laughed at Thanksgiving. That was dumb," I wrote back. "It's okay." And I meant it more than I'd meant it when I said it to my dad, because my cousin didn't have the power my uncle had, didn't carry the same particular weight, and his apology cost him something small and real. The thing about being underestimated for a long time is that when the acknowledgement finally comes, it doesn't feel the way you practiced it feeling. I'd imagined it would feel like proof. Like a door slamming shut on everyone who'd ever looked at me the way my uncle looked at me, the way my uncle looked at me. I thought I'd feel righteous, sealed somehow, finished. Instead, I felt tired. Not empty. Tired is different from empty. Tired has weight, has texture. I was tired from building, and the building wasn't done. In May, 4 years after I shot that first restaurant menu, and 3 years after I decided to run the licensing work under a different name, I signed a lease on a larger studio space. It had good north-facing light and a small conference room and 3 times the square footage I'd had before. My team came with me. We painted the walls ourselves on a Saturday, which was impractical and took twice as long as hiring someone would have, but there was something I needed about doing it that way. My dad came to help. He showed up in his old clothes with a roller and a pan, and we didn't talk much, just painted. And at the end of the day, when we were standing in the middle of the empty main room and the walls were finally the right color, he looked around slowly and then he looked at me. "You're proud of this?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "I am." He nodded. Then he said, "I should have said it earlier, before the magazine. I should have said it when it was just you in an apartment and a second-hand camera, because that was the part that mattered and I didn't. I wasn't paying attention." I looked at him. He was holding the roller with both hands like something to hold on to. "I'm paying attention now," he said. I'd thought about this moment a lot, not this specific version, but the shape of it, someone who'd been quiet finally speaking. I'd rehearsed how I'd feel. Vindicated, measured, cool. I didn't feel any of those things. I just felt like his daughter. "I know," I told him. "It's okay." And this time when I said it, it was true in a way that had nothing to do with being gracious and everything to do with being done. The family dynamics didn't change overnight. My uncle still called occasionally with offers framed as favors. My dad still struggled sometimes to say the direct thing directly, circling around it until he landed. My cousin still posted inspirational quotes about hustle on Instagram 3 times a week, despite not, as far as I could tell, being hustling toward anything specific. But something had shifted in how I moved through it. I stopped explaining myself, not defensively. I just stopped offering the explanation before anyone asked for it, which I'd been doing my whole adult life, volunteering evidence of my own legitimacy before I walked through the door. I noticed the absence of it the way you notice the weight of something you've been carrying when you finally set it down. In the fall, I was invited to speak on a panel at a conference for independent creative businesses in Nashville. The night before the panel, in the hotel lobby, a woman stopped me. She was maybe 23, clutching a press badge, and she looked at me with the kind of energy that comes from being at the beginning of something and not quite believing you're allowed to be there. "I read the WSJ piece," she said. "I've been following the Meridian work for 2 years before I even knew who it was. It changed how I thought about what I was allowed to build." I looked at her. She had a camera bag over one shoulder and dark circles under her eyes, and the particular alertness of someone who had not yet learned how to be still. "What are you building?" I asked. She told me. It was real and specific, and not fully formed yet, but the bones were good. I could hear it. The bones are always audible if you know what to listen for. "Keep the name separate for a while," I said. "Let the work get big enough that it can't be argued with." She nodded slowly. "Then, does it get lonely, doing it that way?" I thought about the Thanksgivings, the Christmas dinners, the phone my uncle didn't let me answer at the table. The years I spent building something in silence, because silence was the only environment where it could grow without being pruned back by other people's fear. Yes, I said honestly, and then it doesn't. She thanked me. She left. I went upstairs and stood by the window for a while and watched the city below, Nashville at night, the lit-up stretch of it, the hum of it that you could feel more than hear from 15 floors up. I thought about the restaurant, the $800, the way I'd driven home from that first shoot with the check on the passenger seat, and something turned on in my chest that never quite turned off after that. I hadn't set out to prove anything to my uncle. That was the truth of it, the version I'd avoided saying because it was less satisfying than the other version, the one where everything I built was secretly aimed at him and the WSJ piece was the arrow finally released. That version made a better story. It was also mostly not true. I built Lumen because I couldn't not build it, because the work was the point, and the work had always been the point, and the loneliness and the dinners, and the still doing the photography thing, and all of the years of swallowing the particular kind of humiliation that comes from being misread by the people who should know you best. All of that was the weather I built through, not the reason I built. The reason was simpler and harder to explain. I was good at this. I'd known I was good at it before anyone else did. And I trusted that knowledge when there was nothing else to trust. That's not a satisfying moral. There's no villain who gets his comeuppance, no table that goes silent, no single moment where the scales tip so visibly that everyone has to acknowledge it. It was slower than that, and quieter than that, and more complicated than that. My uncle did eventually stop calling with offers. He moved on to the next person in the family who could be useful to him, which was what he'd always done and would always do. My dad and I have a dinner every couple of months now, just the two of us, and he asks real questions and listens to the answers, which is the most I've ever asked of anyone. My brother flew out to see the new studio last winter. He walked through the whole thing slowly, touching the walls like he was making sure it was solid, and then he stood in the main room and looked at me and said, "You did it." Just like that, simple, not a question. "Yeah," I said, "I did." He grinned. Grandma called me, by the way. She wants a print, something for the living room. I laughed. I told him I'd handle it personally. I still have the check from that first restaurant shoot. I had it framed, which is embarrassingly sentimental for someone who spent years trying to be unsentimental. But I did it anyway, and it hangs in the studio by the window with the good north-facing light. $800, made out to a business name I don't use anymore, from a restaurant that closed 2 years after I shot their menu. Nobody who works for me knows what it is. They've never asked. They don't need to know the $800. They see the work. The work is the explanation. The check is still on the wall. $800, a closed restaurant, a business name I don't use anymore. I framed it not because it's impressive, but because it's honest. It's the whole story in a single piece of paper, before anyone was watching, before there was anything to watch. I think about that a lot when people ask me how I did it. They want a strategy, a pivot point, a moment where I decided to go all in. And I understand why. We like stories that hinge on a single choice because it makes the outcome feel reachable, like if you just find the right door and open it, you'll end up somewhere like this. But the truth is I didn't make one big decision. I made 1,000 small ones, most of them unglamorous, most of them invisible. I chose to keep going when the restaurant client was the only one. I chose to run the licensing work under a different name, not as a trick, but because I needed the work to be judged on its own terms before anyone had the chance to decide what my terms were worth. I chose to sit at that Thanksgiving table and smile and say, "I'm fine," and mean it. Not because I was hiding something, but because I'd learned that some things grow better in the dark, away from the particular chill of other people's doubt. That's not stubbornness. Or it is, but stubbornness alone doesn't build anything. What I had to develop slowly, the way you develop any skill, was the discipline to trust my own judgment when nothing outside me confirmed it. My uncle didn't confirm it. The family dinners didn't confirm it. For years, the only confirmation I had was the work itself, and I had to decide that was enough. That's the thing nobody tells you about building something real. The intelligence required isn't just technical. It's the intelligence to know when the noise around you is information and when it's just noise. My uncle's voice was noise. The work was information. Learning to tell the difference and acting on that difference every single day, that was the actual skill. And then there's the matter of who you are while you're doing it. I could have become sharp about it, closed off, bitter, the kind of person who walks into every room already defending herself. Some days I almost did, but I watched my uncle and I saw what that looked like from the outside. A man so committed to the story of his own authority that he couldn't see anything that contradicted it. That wasn't who I wanted to be. So I made choices that felt small at the time. I answered my cousin's apology honestly. I let my dad help paint the walls even though I could have hired someone. I told the young woman in the hotel lobby the true version, not the flattering one. That's what integrity costs. Not grand gestures, but the daily decision to be the same person in the hard moments that you were in the easy ones. My grandmother saw it before anyone else did. She said I always had that look, like I was building something nobody could see yet. I think what she was really seeing was that I wasn't performing. I was just working. The check stays on the wall because I need to remember that the beginning was real. $800 was real. The empty apartment was real. All of it was the foundation. And foundations don't look like much until you see what they're holding up.